2017, and this is our second edition to accommodate the various time zones of this presentation. Again, welcome. My name is David Olive, Senior Vice President of Policy Development Support, and talking to you from the ICANN headquarter hub in Istanbul. We welcome you. This is our opportunity from the policy team for senior members of our team to present to you the highlights of various policy and advice activity about to take place at ICANN58 in Copenhagen. We have decided to do an experiment this time, change the format. We in the past have presented a rather lengthy series of slides presenting some of the details of each of the policies and or advice under consideration. We've decided to reduce that to a 60-minute, more interactive session, and we hope that the two briefing materials that have been made available in advance, the ICANN58 policy report and the GNSO policy briefing, provide the details that you would need for the particular content, and we would then be able to provide you with the overview and some of the other aspects around the various topics. So with this in mind, we'd like to proceed with this new format. I'll have my senior team leaders introduce themselves, presenting also and highlighting the topics of the various groups that they support, either a supporting organization or an advisory committee. And then at the end of that, we'll open it up for questions and other comments from you, the community. We thank you for joining us for this call. And of course, at any time, if you want, you may indeed place your comments in the chat, and we will be glad to answer them as well. So with that, let me start. Thank you for, again, coming to this new approach and this new format. I now turn it over to Marika Konings, who will be talking to us a little bit about the GNSO. Marika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our policy update webinar, New Style. My name is Marika Konings, and I'm the Vice President of Policy Development Support for the Generic Name Supporting Organization, or GNSO. As you've all hopefully read in the GNSO policy briefings, which were published in preparation for this webinar, as David noted, there are many projects on the way in the GNSO. These projects can basically be broken down into three buckets. First and foremost, the GNSO policy development process-related activities. There are 9 policy development processes, or PDPs, in the various stages of the PDP life cycle. The 4 listed on this slide are the ones that are in the working group phase. All these working groups have face-to-face meetings scheduled at ICANN58, which are open to anyone interested. So if you want to learn more about the status of work of the new GTLD subsequent procedures PDP, the next generation registration directory services to replace WHOIS PDP, or the review of all rights protection mechanisms in all generic top-level domains, please join these working groups for their meetings. The INGO Access to Curative Rights Protection Mechanisms PDP working group recently published its initial report for public comment. So if you want to learn more about the recommendations contained in that report, or make your opinion heard about these recommendations, please attend their session. There are also a number of implementation review teams, or IRTs, that will be meeting at ICANN58 to progress their work in relation to the implementation of adopted GNSO policy recommendations. Please check out the GNSO policy briefings as well as the schedule for ICANN58 to learn more about the details. Then there's a second category of activity in relation to non-policy issues. This includes the implementation of the GNSO review recommendations, the work that is ongoing in relation to ensuring that the necessary processes and procedures are in place for the GNSO to play its part in the post-transition world of the empowered community. I'll link to that the work on the possible creation of a GNSO standing selection committee to deal with the selection and nomination of GNSO candidates for the different review teams and post-transition structures. All these topics will be further discussed at ICANN58. The last category relates to cross-community working groups that the GNSO has chartered together with other ICANN supporting organizations and advisory committees. One such cross-community working group, or CCWG, concerns new GTLD auction proceeds. As you may be aware, over 230 million USD has been derived from the new GTLD related auctions. This CCWG has been tasked to propose the mechanisms that should be developed in order to allocate these new gTLD auction proceeds. The CCWG recently commenced its deliberations and will continue those at ICANN 58. Last but not least, I'll just mention the CCWG on the use of country and territory names as top-level domains, which makes for a smooth transition to the next speaker, as the CCWG is jointly chartered with the Country Code Supporting Organization, or CCNSO. However, before doing so, I want to encourage you to have your questions ready about any of these topics mentioned, or any others you may have read about in the GNSO policy briefings for the Q&A part of this webinar, which will follow our brief introductions. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Bart Boswinkel.
Thank you, Marika. I will provide you a brief update on 3 topics that will be and that are on the agenda of the CCTLD community present in Copenhagen. First, I want to briefly touch upon the upcoming 3rd policy development process ever launched by the CCNSO, and that regards the retirement of country and code top-level domains, and on the development of a review mechanisms around decisions on delegation, revocation, transfer and retirement of CCTLDs. In Copenhagen, they will, the community president will discuss the format of the PDP, 1 or 2 PDPs, and the schedule and the working group charters, and they will have a final discussion on the scope of the topics. If agreed, then the Council will initiate the discussions or the PDP itself, and within a few days the issue report will be published for the Council and for the community to start the discussion. A second topic I want to touch upon with you is the implementation of the processes and mechanisms related to the empowered community in particular, but more broadly on the implementation of the 1 October 2016 bylaws. This has been high on the CCNSO agenda. They have a dedicated working group dealing with this, and at the Copenhagen meeting there will be an extensive discussion, first of all, of the working group itself, the guideline review committee, and with the community present on the current state of affairs with respect to the implementation of the new bylaws, in particular with respect to the CCNSO as decisional participant, but also around the specific reviews and the organizational review of the CCNSO, which is upcoming. And finally, I want to touch briefly upon the current state of affairs of the cross-community working group on the use of country and territory names. As Marika said, this is a working group which is jointly chartered by the GNSO and the CCNSO. This working group has recently published its interim report or interim paper and seeks public comment. To date, it's very clear for them that a joint or a harmonized framework on the use of country and territory names is not feasible, in particular due to the results of the discussions and input received around the use of 3 letter codes. For that reason, they will, what is contained in the interim report, advise the councils, once finalized, to seek an alternative approach. At the Copenhagen meeting and beyond, they will seek your input on that report in order to move forward. And with that, I want to hand over to my colleague Carlos Reyes, who will inform you about the ASO. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Bart. Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Reyes, and I work with the Address Supporting Organization. As some of you know, the Address Supporting Organization conducts most of its policy development work at the regional level, with the 5 regional internet registries conducting policy development for their service regions. However, the Address Supporting Organization Address Council will be meeting in Copenhagen. This is their annual meeting for the year, and it'll be on Sunday, 12 March. There are currently no global policies under consideration. However, there's a variety of other issues that the Address Council will be addressing in that meeting. So throughout the week, you'll see members of the Address Council in attendance at ICANN sessions, as well as other members of the Internet Numbers community. The other thing to highlight is the meeting of the IANA Numbering Services Review Committee. This committee was set up as part of the IANA Stewardship Transition. With the transition taking effect on 1 October 2016, a service level agreement between ICANN and the 5 regional internet registries also came into effect. And the SLA outlines commitments by the IANA Numbering Services, outlines commitments on behalf of ICANN for performing the IANA numbering services. So this review committee ensures that the service level agreement is met, and that both sides of the agreement are of the same understanding on these services. Beyond that, as I mentioned, there will be members of the Internet Numbers community at ICANN58, as well as the ongoing review of the ASO, which is coordinated by the Number Resources Organization, the NRO. And with that, I'm going to transition to the advisory committees now, and we begin with the at-large community, and the at-large advisory community, at-large advisory committee with an update from my colleague Heidi Ulrich.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Hello, everyone. My name is Heidi Ulrich. I am speaking to you from Copenhagen, and I'm going to be talking about the 3 main topics that at-large will be discussing during ICANN58. The first is the work of the at-large structures, criteria and expectations task force. And starting prior to the current at-large review, the ALAC and regional leaders have been reassessing the criteria and expectations for organizations to become and remain an at-large structure, or ALS. In the past, at-large has focused on expanding the number of ALSs, which are at the base of the at-large community. As the number of ALSs has now reached 220, at-large now sees the need to make existing ALSs more effective in the policy advice development process. As part of this effort, the ALAC will be improving the tools and processes to ensure full engagement of ALS members in ICANN activities. Now, during ICANN58, the ALS Criteria and Expectations Task Force will provide an update on their work with a focus on communication, expectations, and processes. The second main topic is the at-large review. Now, since May 2016, Items International, the independent examiner, has been conducting the organizational review of the at-large community, focusing on the regional at-large organizations, or the RALOs, and the ALSs. And the public comment of its draft reports is currently open until the 24th of March. The draft report proposes 16 recommendations that Items believe will help improve the structure and effectiveness of the at-large community. At ICANN58, Items will hold a public workshop which will provide an opportunity for a community-wide discussion on the findings and proposed recommendations. The aim of this session is to develop useful and implementable recommendations. In addition, the ALAC and regional leaders will hold a 2-hour session on Sunday with Items about the draft report. The at-large review working party will also hold a working session to finalize the at-large response to the draft report. And finally, the third item is at-large and Workstream 2 issues. Many members of at-large are actively helping to shape the outcome of the Workstream 2 issues. 3 members of at-large are either chairs or co-chairs of some of the Workstream 2 subgroups. In addition to participating in Workstream 2 subgroup called the At-Large Evolution Working Group has been meeting regularly to both update at-large members on the Workstream 2 activities as well as get feedback and support for at-large reviews. At ICANN58, the ALAC and RALO leaders will review and discuss the 9 topics within Workstream 2 in order to ensure broader understanding within at-large. And now I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Olaf Nordling, for the Government Advisory Committee. Olaf?
Thank you very much, Heidi, and good evening from Brussels. And my name is Olaf Nordling, responsible for ICANN staff support to the Governmental Advisory Committee, frequently called the GAC. So it's time for a few words about what they are up to and their activities at ICANN58. So let's start with the Red Cross national names and intergovernmental organizations acronyms. And protection of such identifiers as second-level domain names has been a recurring theme in the GAC, and where the GAC and the GNSO seem to have somewhat different views. These views are now subject to facilitated dialogue, which will continue in Copenhagen and perhaps conclude. There is always hope. And the GAC will also consider the accountability workstream 2 topics like diversity, transparency, and human rights. There will be GAC plenary discussions on these topics, and the GAC also has its own working group on the topic of human rights and international law. So now, you've already heard from Marika that there are multiple policy development processes, or PDPs, going on in the GNSO on subsequent procedures for new GTLDs, or registration directory services, and more, just to mention 2 very important ones from a GAC perspective. And the GAC is keen to provide public policy input to those in a timely manner regarding, among other things, geographical names, access to registrant information, community applications, safeguards for regulated sectors, and applicant support. Also, just to mention a few. I'll stop there, noting that these topics are just samples from the agenda of the GAC and its working groups in Copenhagen. And that agenda is truly extensive, bordering to, well, what Bill Haley would call rock around the clock, if anybody remembers him except me. So let's now cross the Atlantic to my colleague Steve Sheng, who will tell you about other advisory committees. Thank you for your attention, and take it away, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf, and hello, everyone. I will provide a brief update on the 2 technical and security advisory committees at ICANN. First, the Root Server System Advisory Committee, or the RSAC. Since ICANN 57, the RSAC has published 3 documents. The first document, numbered 23, focuses on the history of the root server system. There has been a lot of interest in that. This document also contains operational history of each of the 13 entities operating the root service provided by the root server themselves, as well as a chronological history of the whole system from its beginning in the early 80s to the present day. The second report, numbered 24, here the RSAC defined key technical elements of a potential new root server operator. This will be a critical part of any potential root server operator designation process. Finally, in RSAC 26, the RSAC reported the outcome, 25, the RSAC reported the outcome of its 3rd workshop, focusing on the evolution, continuity, and accountability of the root server system. For the Security and Stability Advisory Committee, or the SAC, It has also published 3 reports since ICANN57. The first document is a comment to a ICANN initiative on Identifier Technology Health Indicator. This is numbered 91. In the second report, SEC 90, the SEC studied the risks to security and stability that arise from ambiguity in the use of the domain namespace. And based on the study, it offered a set of observations and recommendations to mitigate some of those risks. And finally, in the third publication, numbered 89, the SEC provided a set of detailed responses to a comment on a CCNSO document on the proposed guidelines for the second string similarity review process. So that's a quick overview of RSEC and SEC. I will now hand it over to David for question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve and other colleagues. We would like now to open it up for questions you would have of our team leaders relating to the topics they talked about or some other matters on the policy and advice side of our activities. If you'd like to raise your hand in the Adobe Connect room, I'll be glad to take a cue, or if you just type in the question in the chat box, that would be helpful as well. While you are contemplating the questions, we were given some questions in advance, some from the earlier open house conversations, and one particular question related to the subsequent procedure PDP working group, which of course we've all been aware of, and they wanted to know when this work might wrap up. They asked and said that it's difficult to predict such a thing, but they wanted to know our best thinking on the subsequent procedure PDP and when it might be completed. One of my colleagues may indeed want to take that question as we start the conversation.
Hi, David. This is Steve Chan. I can take that question.
Thanks, Steve. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So currently, the work plan is showing the end of 2017 for the delivery of the initial report. And then subsequently, we're looking at Q3 of 2018 for delivery of the final report to the GNSO Council. So following delivery to the GNSO Council, there is council deliberation, and there's also an additional public comment, and then board consideration. So in terms of the question that we received earlier today, the answer is Q3 of 2018. The community leadership is doing its best to manage the extensive list of issues. There are nearly 40 within its remit and its charter, but it's also dependent on work of other groups like the Competition, Consumer Trust, and Consumer Trust Review Team, the CCWG of Use and Country Territory Names that Bart and Rika mentioned. So the leadership is cognizant of these preliminary deadlines, and it's doing its best to adhere to them. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Other comments or questions? We did have another question relating to the GNSO PDP that came in advance, and it related to how do reviews happen during the PDP process. Marika, would you want to just explain and talk a little bit about that for people?
Yes, thank you, David. This is Marika again. I think indeed the question related to the review of policies. And there's actually not a one-size-fits-all approach in relation to that. There's no required period within which review takes place of adopted PDP recommendations. However, having said that, of course, that doesn't mean that there is no review or review doesn't take place. it may depend on the policy and how it was implemented or what the requirements were for those policies, as some policies actually include in their recommendations a recommended time frame for review. In other cases, there may be certain issues that are brought to the attention of either staff or the community that may trigger such a review. Or in other cases, it just means that because the cycle has completed, the community may want to review and evaluate what might be next in store. And one example there, for example, is the new utility subsequent procedures, where the original policy recommendations were implemented, and the basis for the previous round of new GTLDs, the community is now reviewing whether the policy as originally developed is still valid, and if not, what changes, if any, should be made either to the policy or implementation guidance that may be provided. Others, colleagues may have feedback how it works in the other supporting organizations, but that is at least the perspective from the GNSS.
Thank you very much, Marika. That's very helpful, and it was part of the discussion of the earlier session that we thought we'd have of interest here as well. There was another question posited in the beginning of our conversation about the role of ICANN in the CCTLD and CCTLD operators. Bart, would you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you for the question, David, again. Let's be very clear about it. Say, ICANN's role is very limited with respect to CCTLDs. It's limited to delegation, transfer, revocation, and retirement processes. And in that role, it is involved as the IANA functions or operator. So it is more an operational role than anything else. And this role is derived from the existing policies around it, so that's mainly RFC 1591 and the different interpretations and practices and guidelines around it, like the framework of interpretation, and for governments the GAC principles. So in essence, ICANN's role is very limited to an operational aspect, and in that role they will take some decisions, and what I just alluded to, say the review mechanism is around these decisions in this area. A second point is, say, what is the role of, say, the local entities, in particular the, say, governments. Again, this depends very much on the local circumstances, whether there is legislation in place or there isn't, who are considered the significantly interested parties from or at a national level. So that is definitely the government or the relevant government entity, depending on whether it's a territory or not. And of course the CCTLD manager, but also others. And again, as said, that depends very much on the local circumstances, and the RSC 1591 and the framework of interpretation will provide some clarity around that concept. So yeah, I hope this addresses the question and provides a sufficient answer. Thank you, David.
Excuse me, sorry, I was having trouble with my my audio. Thank you very much, Bart. There was also a discussion of the protection of intellectual property at ICANN, and I wanted to know if Mary could tell us a little bit about some of the work in the GNSO in this area that's coming up. Mary?
Thanks, David. Hello, everybody. This is Mary Wong from the policy team. And David, I sure can, although others with additional comments should feel free to jump in after me. I believe that question was asked in a much broader context, so I think it would be helpful to remind everybody that ICANN does not, within its limited mission, have the ability to regulate content. However, it's been recognized throughout ICANN's history that protection of intellectual property rights in a balanced way is necessarily part of making domain name policy. So as an example, the earliest consensus policy, meaning policy that's binding on all ICANN's contracted parties, was developed as long ago as 1999, the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, which is often abbreviated understandably to UDRP. What I'd like to emphasize for our audience today coming into ICANN 58 is that, as Marika mentioned in her presentation, we actually have a policy development process, or PDP, going on right now in the GNSO to review the UDRP as well as all the other various rights protection mechanisms that have been developed throughout the course of ICANN's history. This PDP is being done in 2 phases, and the UDRP will actually be tackled in the second phase. The first phase is something to do with the 2012 UGTLD program expansion round, and that is reviewing all the right protections mechanisms for that round. So this also feeds into something that Steve Chan noted earlier in respect of another PDP, which is the new GTLD subsequent procedures. Essentially, one of the related parallel efforts is this review of rights protection mechanisms. So the hope is to finish this phase 1 of this rights protection mechanisms PDP by the end of this calendar year so that it can feed into that other broader PDP. And following that, then the working group will undertake a review of the venerable UDRP. And on that note, I'm going to hand it back to David, but I want to acknowledge also the presence on the webinar today of 2 of the co-chairs of the Rights Protection Mechanisms PDP, Kathy Kleiman and Philip Corwin, as well as a few working group members. David, I hope that gives some examples of how we've dealt with intellectual property concerns in ICANN, particularly recently.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was also related to a domain name forum in Kiev that I attended, where the topic was intellectual property protection on the internet. I, of course, focused on the ICANN policies relating to the trademark protections. And so thank you very much for explaining that. But I also pointed out the PDP process within the GNSO as another opportunity to comment on the processes we have in place and the reviews going on at this stage. So I welcome Kathy and Phil to the conversation, and of course you're working intensely on that topic for the working group, and we appreciate that effort and service. And thank you, Heather. Those interested in those issues to join the work of the intellectual property constituency, that is another way of being very active and involved in the activities within the GNSO, and we thank you for that. We have a question about understanding ICANN is not responsible for content, so how is it regulated? What advice does ICANN offer to queries or complaints on content issues in domains? Mary, would you like to start, and we can have others join us?
Surely. Thank you, David. This is Mary Wong again, everybody, and thank you, Ms. Krishna, for your question. And thank you for understanding that ICANN is not a content regulator. I would say that in response to your question, which is what advice can ICANN offer when there's a complaint about content in domain names, that really depends on what that complaint is about. So for example, if it is in relation to one of ICANN's contracted parties, either a registry operator or a registrar, in some way not following its contractual obligations with ICANN, because they do each have contracts with ICANN, then the proper forum for that would be to bring the matter to the attention of ICANN's compliance department. And you can find information as well as a complaint form on the ICANN website for the compliance department. There's various other forms, formats, and methods, again, depending on the nature of the complaint. But as we're on a policy webinar, I think one thing I would like to highlight is that there was a recently completed policy development process in the GNSO to do with the accreditation of privacy and proxy service providers. And these are the folks who offer services where you can mask some or all of your contact details in the WHOIS when you register a domain name. So part of the work that was done in that PDP was the development of a framework whereby these providers would be given uniform, clear guidelines on how to handle requests for information coming from intellectual property rights owners with complaints about particular domains. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I hope that these examples give you a sense of how within ICANN's remit and within certain frameworks, whether it be contract or consensus policy, we are able to deal with some kind of limited complaint. David?
Thank you very much, Mary. And Mr. Krishna, we hope that answers the question as well as other resources within the intellectual property constituency or attending some of these working groups either remotely or if you're going to be there in person in Copenhagen to find out more. I'm sure the chairs and experts would be happy to chat with you at the ICANN meeting about some of those elements. With that, I'll ask if there are any other questions, comments. I would like to go to another question that was given to us, and it relates to what the community groups are doing to prepare for the accountability mechanism to instituted with the empowered community. As you all know on this call, there are 9 community powers to ensure that the ICANN board and organization are accountable, including reject ICANN budget or strategic plan, reject changes to the ICANN standard bylaws, remove individual board members or recall the entire board, approve changes to fundamental bylaws and articles of incorporation, initiate a binding community independent review, and reject ICANN board decisions relating to ICANN functions and reviews. In addition, of course, the various community members involved are looking at this and studying it closely, and we would just like to see if Mary can talk to us a little bit about this and others comment about the work that the groups are doing in this regard. Mary?
Thank you, David. And hello again, it's Mary Wong. And again, I invite other colleagues as well as any of our participants to chime in either in the chat or otherwise, because I do note that in our participants, we do have a nice range of representatives and members from across the ICANN policy community, from different supporting organizations and advisory committees. So David, the short answer to the question is that each decisional participant in the new empowered community is indeed thinking and working internally about what some of those new obligations and rights are for them as a result of the 9 new community powers you enumerated. And of course, the 5 decisional participants in the empowered community are the address supporting organization, the country code name supporting organization, the generic name supporting organization, that is the 3 SOs as we call them, and 2 of the advisory committees, the GAC and the ALAC. Each group is at a different stage in its work, but I would think that in ICANN 58, we will see some groups reporting progress and some groups also discussing how they can collaborate to make sure that the processes that they have in place or will have in place to handle these new powers make sense and work across the community. And one example I can give in that respect is the CCNSO and the GNSO, because as folks who may be familiar with the revised bylaws will know, there are various parts in the new bylaws related to the empowered community that actually specifically require CCNSO and GNSO collaboration. So for now, the only other thing I'll say, in addition to the fact that each decisional participant is looking at its own internal processes, is that there is another body created within the empowered community by the bylaws, and that is the administration, or the EC administration. The point I want to emphasize here is that this is not the same as another decisional participant. It is, in fact, the administrative body through which the 5 decisional participants would communicate their requests and decisions to the board or to ICANN and receive notifications the other way. So hopefully that gives everyone a quick sketch of what is happening within each decisional participant. A note that the EC administration is how each and all the participants act, and so we can look forward to more discussion on this at ICANN 58. Thanks, David.
Thank you very much, Mary. This is another important element and activities that will also be ongoing at ICANN 58 amongst the other working groups and councils that will be meeting there at that time. But it is an important area that we wanted to highlight in general to the groups and keep them aware of the activities within each other's group. With that, I'd like to say that we have to move now to, if there are no other questions, point out that there are a number of important conversations going on at ICANN 58, and in particular, the Council of Europe privacy experts will also be there in a joint meeting with the GAC and the GNSO on Monday. And that is also linked to some of the work that's being done by those two groups. And it'll be an important opportunity to hear some of the privacy experts talking about their roles and responsibilities. Also, at the ICANN meetings, we have Constituency Day, and many of the groups are planning questions and interactions with the board. A full day of those interactions will take place at ICANN 58. And also to remind you, an innovation that Joran did introduce on Thursday at 12 noon to 1 o'clock, there will be a session where the ICANN executive team, myself included, will be at a session with the questions from the community on our activities and responsibilities. So if you have no questions here in this webinar, you can surely follow up on Thursday in Copenhagen. With that, I'd like to thank you for attending. This is an experiment in trying to make the conversation a little more interactive, and we would like to hear your views on that. And also, we hope that the 2 documents, the Pre-58 policy report and the GNSO report on their PDP activities are a help to all of you. And we also will follow our tradition of having the post-ICANN 58 policy report summing up some of the activities and progress made in policy and advice at ICANN 58. With that, we hope to see many of you in person in Copenhagen, but if you cannot, please note that we have a rather robust remote participation, and we encourage you to be involved in that way if you cannot be personally in Copenhagen. That'll give you an opportunity to listen to the discussions and be part of that and input into those discussions during the various sessions in Copenhagen. We thank you, Nigel, for letting us know that the Privacy Summit is at 15:15 on Monday, the first day of the ICANN meeting. And that's, again, an important session that people may want to put on their calendars. With that, seeing no other questions or comments, I would like to, again, thank you for participating. The involvement of the community and interest in our policy and advice work is very crucial to the work of ICANN, and your hard work and efforts to make that happen are appreciated by all of us. So with that, I wish everyone a safe travel if you're going to be going to Copenhagen, or we hope to hear you online remotely. And I wish everyone a good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for your attention and participation.